The morning sun filtered through the glass windows of Innovatech Solutions, casting long shadows across the sleek lobby. The air buzzed with anticipation as candidates nervously adjusted their ties, smoothed out their skirts, and rehearsed answers to potential interview questions under their breaths. This was a big day for everyone. Innovatech wasn't just another tech company, it was the place to work. Known for its cutting-edge projects and competitive salaries, landing a job here meant stepping into a world of opportunity. Among the polished professionals waiting in line was Claire Harper. At least that's what her name tag read. But, unlike the others dressed in crisp suits and shiny shoes, Claire looked like she had just stepped out of a muddy swamp. Her hair was matted with dirt, her clothes clung to her damp skin, and streaks of mud covered every inch of her visible skin. She stood quietly at the edge of the room, clutching a slightly crumpled folder containing her resume. People couldn't help but stare. Some whispered behind cupped hands, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Was this some kind of prank? Or maybe a publicity stunt? No one could figure it out. A young man sitting nearby leaned toward his friend and muttered, "What is she even doing here? Did she fall off her bike or something?" His friend shrugged, equally baffled. Meanwhile, an older woman frowned disapprovingly, shaking her head as if Claire's very presence offended her sense of decorum. Even the receptionist raised an eyebrow when Claire approached the desk to check in. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" the receptionist asked hesitantly, eyeing Claire's muddy appearance. Claire simply nodded, her expression calm despite the chaos brewing around her. She didn't seem embarrassed or defensive, just focused. It was almost as though she knew exactly where she belonged, regardless of how she looked. Still, the murmurs grew louder. Someone joked about whether they should offer her a mop before letting her inside. Another person suggested she might be auditioning for a role in a disaster movie instead of interviewing for a corporate job. Despite the mocking comments, Claire remained unfazed. She found a seat near the corner, placed her folder on her lap, and waited patiently, her eyes fixed on the clock ticking steadily above the door. Behind closed doors, Jonathan Reed, the CEO of Innovatech, sat reviewing the list of candidates scheduled for interviews that day. He prided himself on running a tight ship, and he expected nothing less than perfection from anyone who walked into his office. When his assistant knocked and informed him about the unusual arrival, a candidate covered in mud, he nearly choked on his coffee. "Mud? Are you serious?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. His assistant nodded solemnly, confirming that yes, there was indeed a woman in the lobby looking like she'd been wrestling with a mud puddle. Jonathan sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. He hated surprises, especially ones that disrupted the carefully orchestrated rhythm of his day. Part of him wanted to send her away immediately. It wouldn't reflect well on the company to entertain such unprofessional behavior. Yet, another part of him was curious. Who shows up to an interview like this? And why? Maybe there was more to this story than met the eye. After a moment of deliberation, he decided to see for himself. Little did he know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would change everything, not just for Claire, but for the entire company. Jonathan Reed wasn't the kind of man who made decisions lightly. As the CEO of Innovatech Solutions, he had spent years building a reputation for being meticulous, disciplined, and unyielding in his pursuit of excellence. Every employee at Innovatech knew the rules. Professionalism came first. From the way you dressed to the way you carried yourself, every detail mattered. Jonathan believed that success was built on structure, and he expected everyone around him to share that belief. But now, as he sat in his office contemplating the situation unfolding in the lobby, he found himself questioning his own principles. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer some clarity. A candidate covered in mud. It sounded absurd, almost comical. What could possibly justify showing up to an interview in such a state? Was this a cry for attention, an act of rebellion against corporate norms? Or perhaps, as unlikely as it seemed, there was a legitimate reason behind it. Either way, Jonathan couldn't ignore the fact that this incident had already caused a stir among his staff. The whispers were spreading like wildfire, and he knew that whatever decision he made next would set the tone for how the company handled unexpected challenges. His assistant, Lisa, hovered near the doorway, clearly unsure whether to leave or stay. Sensing her hesitation, Jonathan waved her in. "Tell me everything you know about her," he said, his voice calm but firm. Lisa hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Her name is Claire Harper. She checked in on time, didn't make a fuss, and hasn't complained about anything. Honestly, sir, she seems composed. Like she knows she doesn't look perfect, but she's not letting it bother her." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Composed? That was an interesting choice of words. Most people in Claire's position would have been flustered, embarrassed, or defensive. Yet, according to Lisa, Claire appeared unfazed by the chaos she had inadvertently created. This intrigued Jonathan even more. He had always valued confidence in his employees. It was one of the traits he looked for during interviews, but this level of poise under scrutiny was rare. Still, confidence alone wasn't enough to secure a spot at Innovatech. There had to be substance beneath the surface. As he mulled over the situation, Jonathan's mind drifted back to his own journey. He hadn't started at the top. He'd worked tirelessly to build Innovatech from the ground up. Along the way, he had faced countless obstacles, some predictable, others completely unforeseen. Each challenge had taught him something new, forcing him to adapt and grow. Perhaps this muddy candidate was a test of sorts, nudging him to reconsider what truly mattered in a potential hire. Was it adherence to rigid expectations, or was it something deeper? Could someone who broke the mold still contribute meaningfully to the company? The more he thought about it, the more conflicted he felt. On one hand, dismissing Claire outright would send a clear message: professionalism above all else. It would reinforce the standards he had worked so hard to establish. On the other hand, meeting with her might reveal something extraordinary, something that could inspire change within the organization. Jonathan prided himself on being a leader who led by example, but lately he had begun to wonder if he had become too rigid, too focused on maintaining order at the expense of innovation. Maybe this was his chance to prove otherwise. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jonathan stood up and straightened his tie. "Send her in," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lisa nodded quickly and scurried out of the office, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts once again. He glanced at his reflection in the glass window, smoothing down his hair as he prepared to face the mysterious candidate. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. This meeting would be unlike any other he had experienced in his career. And deep down, despite his initial irritation, Jonathan couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. When Claire Harper walked into Jonathan Reed's office, the contrast between her and the pristine surroundings was impossible to ignore. The room was a picture of elegance: polished wooden furniture, sleek modern decor, and large windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Yet here she was, dripping mud onto the carpet, her disheveled appearance starkly out of place. For a moment, Jonathan wondered if this entire situation was some elaborate prank. But then he looked at her face. There was no trace of mischief or mockery in her expression, only calm determination. Claire didn't wait for him to speak. Instead, she took a deep breath and began explaining herself, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Reed, I understand how I must look right now, and I want to apologize for showing up like this. Believe me, it wasn't my plan." She paused briefly, glancing down at her muddy hands before continuing. "On my way here, I came across an accident. A car had skidded off the road during the rain and ended up in a ditch. A family was trapped inside, including 2 young children. They were scared and hurt, and there wasn't much time." Jonathan listened intently, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. Claire went on to describe how she had stopped, without hesitation, wading through the slippery, rain-soaked ground to help pull the family out of the wreckage. "The mud was everywhere," she said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "But honestly, I didn't care about that. All I cared about was making sure they were safe." Emergency services arrived shortly afterward, but by then Claire was soaked to the bone and caked in dirt from head to toe. With no time to go home and change, and unwilling to miss her interview after preparing for weeks, she made the decision to come straight to Innovatech. As she spoke, Jonathan noticed something remarkable about her demeanor. Despite the chaos of the morning, Claire radiated sincerity. Her words weren't rehearsed or exaggerated. They felt genuine, heartfelt. It was as though she wasn't trying to impress him, but simply wanted to explain why she hadn't shown up in the polished manner everyone expected. And while her story was certainly unusual, it revealed qualities that couldn't be listed on a resume: courage, empathy, and quick thinking under pressure. "I know this isn't how candidates usually arrive for interviews," Claire admitted, her tone softening slightly. "And I completely understand if you decide not to move forward with my application. But I hope you'll believe me when I say that helping those people was the right thing to do, even if it meant risking this opportunity." For a moment, silence filled the room. Jonathan leaned forward in his chair, studying her carefully. He had interviewed hundreds of candidates over the years, each one meticulously prepared to present their best selves. But none of them had ever walked into his office with a story quite like this. Most would have prioritized their personal gain over someone else's safety. Claire, however, had chosen differently, and she had done so without hesitation or regret. Something about her honesty struck a chord within Jonathan. He had always valued technical skills and professional polish, but sitting across from Claire, he realized that character mattered just as much, if not more. The tech industry moved fast, and challenges often arose without warning. In moments like those, having employees who could think on their feet, act with integrity, and put others first could make all the difference. As Claire finished speaking, Jonathan found himself wondering whether dismissing her based on appearances alone might mean missing out on someone truly exceptional. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Thank you for explaining," he said finally, his voice measured but tinged with respect. "I appreciate your candor and your actions this morning. Let's continue." Claire nodded gratefully, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she settled into the chair across from him. Little did she know, her willingness to share her story had already begun to shift the course of the interview, and perhaps even the future of Innovatech itself. As Claire sat across from Jonathan, her story still lingering in the air between them, something subtle yet profound began to shift in the room. Jonathan had always prided himself on being a man of logic and reason. Decisions were made based on data, qualifications, and measurable outcomes, not emotions or gut feelings. But as he studied Claire's face, the quiet resolve in her eyes, the way she carried herself despite the absurdity of the situation, he found himself reflecting on his own leadership philosophy. For years, Jonathan had built Innovatech Solutions into a powerhouse by focusing on precision and professionalism. He believed that success came from structure, discipline, and unwavering standards, and while those principles had served him well, they had also created an environment where people often felt pressured to conform, sometimes at the expense of authenticity. Employees wore masks of perfection, afraid to show vulnerability or deviate from the expected norm. It was a culture that bred excellence but perhaps lacked heart. Claire's presence challenged all of that. Here was someone who had walked into his office covered in mud, hardly the image of a polished professional, and yet she exuded a quiet confidence that couldn't be manufactured. Her actions earlier that day spoke volumes about her character. She hadn't hesitated when faced with danger. She had acted selflessly, putting others' needs above her own. Most people would have driven past the accident scene, rationalizing that they were already late for an important meeting. Claire hadn't done that. She had stopped because it was the right thing to do. Consequences be damned. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest as he processed these thoughts. He realized that what he valued most in employees wasn't just technical skill or experience. It was the ability to adapt, to think critically, and to act with integrity even when no one was watching. Those qualities weren't always visible on paper or during a neatly rehearsed interview. Sometimes they revealed themselves in unexpected ways, like showing up to an interview covered in mud after saving a family from an accident. He thought about the other candidates waiting outside. Each one had undoubtedly prepared meticulously for this moment, crafting answers designed to impress him. They were qualified, polished, and eager to prove themselves. Yet none of them had shown the raw, unfiltered humanity that Claire had brought into the room simply by being herself. It made Jonathan wonder, had he been too rigid in his approach? Had he unintentionally overlooked talented individuals because they didn't fit the mold he had created? The more he reflected, the more he realized that this wasn't just about hiring Claire. It was about setting a precedent. If he dismissed her now, he would be reinforcing the idea that appearances mattered, more than substance. But if he chose to give her a chance, he would be sending a powerful message that Innovatech valued character as much as competence. That innovation wasn't just about technology, it was about people. Claire watched him silently, sensing the weight of his deliberation. She didn't try to fill the silence with unnecessary words or excuses. Instead, she sat patiently, her hands clasped loosely in her lap, her posture relaxed but respectful. There was no desperation in her demeanor, only a quiet assurance that she had done everything she could to explain herself. Whether or not Jonathan decided to proceed with the interview, she seemed content knowing she had stayed true to her values. Finally, Jonathan broke the silence. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "when I started this company, I wanted to build something extraordinary, something that would push boundaries and inspire change. Over time, I think I may have lost sight of what really drives innovation. It's not just algorithms or strategies, it's people. People who care enough to step outside their comfort zones and make a difference." He paused, looking directly at Claire. "Your actions today remind me of that. You didn't let fear or inconvenience stop you from doing what was right. That takes courage, and courage is something we need around here." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth turning upward in a gesture that softened his otherwise stern features. "Let's continue this conversation. I'd like to hear more about you." Claire blinked, momentarily surprised by his words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, a genuine, grateful expression that lit up her entire demeanor. For the first time since stepping foot into Innovatech, she felt seen, not as a muddy stranger, but as someone capable of contributing meaningfully to the company. Little did either of them know, this decision would mark the beginning of a transformation, not just for Claire, but for the entire organization. The atmosphere in Jonathan's office shifted noticeably after his decision to continue the interview. The initial tension dissolved, replaced by a sense of mutual respect and curiosity. Claire, who had entered the room feeling like an outsider, began to relax. She leaned forward slightly in her chair, her body language open and engaged, as if she finally believed she belonged there. Jonathan, too, seemed more at ease, The moment Jonathan announced his decision to hire Claire Harper, the room fell eerily silent. He had gathered his executive team in the boardroom to discuss the final candidates for the innovation team position. When he revealed that Claire, the woman who had arrived covered in mud, was his choice, jaws dropped. Some team members exchanged incredulous glances while others stared at him as though he'd lost his mind. The air was thick with unspoken questions. How could this be justified? What message did it send to the other polished, well-prepared candidates? Jonathan anticipated their reaction and calmly laid out his reasoning. "I understand this might seem unconventional," he began, his voice steady but firm. "But let me ask you something. When was the last time any of us made a decision based purely on gut instinct instead of sticking to the script?" He went on to recount Claire's story, the accident, her selfless actions, and the courage it took to show up despite knowing she didn't look the part. "We talk about innovation all the time," he continued, "but true innovation starts with people who aren't afraid to break the mold. Claire proved today that she has the qualities we need most: resilience, empathy, and the ability to act under pressure." Not everyone was convinced. One senior manager raised his hand hesitantly. "With all due respect, Jonathan, isn't this risky? We're setting a precedent here. If word gets out, people might think we don't value professionalism anymore." Another chimed in. "What about the other candidates? They worked hard to prepare for this interview. Won't they feel cheated?" Jonathan listened patiently, acknowledging their concerns. Then he leaned forward, his tone shifting from reflective to resolute. "Let's be clear. Professionalism still matters. It always will. But professionalism doesn't mean perfection. It means doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Claire showed us that today. As for the other candidates, I have no doubt they'll find opportunities elsewhere. Our job is to build a team that reflects the values we claim to stand for. And if we truly believe in pushing boundaries, then we need to start living those ideals ourselves." His words resonated with some, though skepticism lingered among others. Still, Jonathan stood by his decision, refusing to back down. Later that day, he called Claire into his office to deliver the news. She sat across from him, her expression unreadable as he explained that she had been selected for the role. For a brief moment, she seemed stunned, as if unsure whether to believe him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. One of relief, gratitude, and quiet triumph. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I promise I won't let you down." Jonathan nodded, offering her an encouraging smile. "You already haven't," he replied. "Now it's time to show everyone else why I made this decision." Word of Claire's hiring spread quickly through the office. Whispers echoed in hallways and break rooms as employees tried to make sense of it. Some admired Jonathan's boldness, seeing it as proof that Innovatech was willing to embrace unconventional talent. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether Claire's heartwarming backstory outweighed her actual qualifications. Even the candidates who hadn't been chosen couldn't help but gossip about the bizarre turn of events. But Claire didn't let the chatter distract her. On her first day, she arrived early, dressed neatly in professional attire, ready to prove herself. During introductions, she kept her explanation simple. "I'm thrilled to be here and can't wait to contribute to the team." There was no defensiveness, no attempt to justify her muddy entrance. Instead, she focused on building connections, asking thoughtful questions, and diving headfirst into her new role. It didn't take long for her colleagues to see past the initial shock. Within weeks, Claire began making waves. She proposed creative solutions to ongoing challenges, collaborated seamlessly with teammates, and approached every task with boundless energy. Her ability to blend technical expertise with genuine empathy set her apart, earning her respect even from those who had initially doubted her. Slowly but surely, the murmurs of disbelief faded, replaced by admiration for the woman who had dared to walk into an interview covered in mud and walked out with a life-changing opportunity. From the moment Claire Harper stepped into her new role at Innovatech, it became clear that Jonathan's decision to hire her was more than just a leap of faith. It was a stroke of genius. Her impact rippled through the company almost immediately, not because she tried to prove herself, but because she simply was herself. Every action she took, every idea she proposed, seemed to stem from a place of authenticity and purpose. And that made all the difference. One of Claire's earliest contributions came during a brainstorming session for a client project. The team had been struggling to come up with a solution that balanced efficiency with user-friendliness. Most suggestions leaned heavily toward cutting-edge technology, which risked alienating less tech-savvy customers. Claire listened quietly as her colleagues debated, jotting down notes before finally speaking up. "What if we focus on simplicity first?" she suggested. "We can use advanced tools in the background, but the interface should feel intuitive, like talking to a friend." Her analogy struck a chord, shifting the conversation entirely. By the end of the meeting, the team had a fresh direction, one that ultimately led to glowing feedback from the client. Beyond her technical skills, Claire brought something else to the table: humanity. She had an innate ability to connect with people, whether it was cheering up a stressed coworker or mediating a heated disagreement between team members. One afternoon, two senior developers clashed over conflicting approaches to a critical deadline. Tensions escalated until Claire stepped in, calmly asking each person to explain their perspective. Rather than taking sides, she helped them find common ground, turning what could have been a disaster into a productive collaboration. Afterward, one of the developers joked, "Claire should get hazard pay for dealing with us." Her influence extended beyond individual interactions. It began reshaping the company culture. Inspired by her volunteer work, Claire spearheaded an initiative to partner Innovatech with local nonprofits. Under her leadership, employees started dedicating a few hours each month to community service projects, from teaching coding workshops to underprivileged kids to organizing food drives. These efforts weren't mandatory, yet participation soared. Colleagues who once saw each other only as co-workers began bonding over shared experiences, creating a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. Even Jonathan noticed the change. He often observed Claire from afar, marveling at how effortlessly she navigated challenges while uplifting those around her. During one particularly chaotic week, when multiple deadlines loomed and stress levels ran high, he overheard her offering words of encouragement to a junior employee. "You've got this," she said warmly. "Just take it step by step. I'm here if you need help." It was a small gesture, but it reminded Jonathan of why he had trusted his instincts in the first place. Claire wasn't just excelling in her role. She was redefining what success looked like within the company. As months passed, skepticism about her hiring faded completely. Employees who had initially questioned her presence now sought her advice, praised her creativity, and admired her resilience. Even some of the candidates who hadn't been chosen reached out to congratulate her after hearing about her achievements. One former competitor wrote to her saying, "I may not have gotten the job, but I respect how you handled everything. You're proof that character counts." Claire's journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming, moments when self-doubt crept in, but she faced each obstacle with the same determination that had driven her to stop for that stranded family on the rainy morning of her interview. She reminded herself, and others, that setbacks weren't failures. They were opportunities to learn and grow. By the end of her first year at Innovatech, Claire had become a cornerstone of the innovation team. Her name was mentioned in meetings, not just as a contributor, but as an inspiration. What started as a bold gamble by Jonathan Reed had transformed into a testament to the power of looking beyond appearances and valuing substance over surface. For Claire, it was more than just a job. It was a chance to make a difference. And for everyone at Innovatech, it was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the messiest beginnings. Years later, when Jonathan Reed sat in his office reflecting on his career, he often found himself thinking about Claire Harper. The woman who had walked into his life covered in mud had not only changed the trajectory of her own future, but also left an indelible mark on Innovatech solutions, and on him personally. What started as a single unconventional decision had blossomed into a legacy of transformation, one that shaped the company's culture and inspired countless others to embrace authenticity over conformity. Claire's rise within Innovatech was nothing short of remarkable.